And it is Friday, my favorite day of the week, but also not because it comes right for the weekend and the end of the week, but I get to hang out with my buddies. So I don't believe we have a guest today. So let me just bring on the crew here. I'm going to start with Mike. Hello, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm a little tired this week, but I'm doing good. Let me get
Another week.
Aidan on here. What's up?
Hey guys.
Hey, good to see you.
Here we are again.
Here we are.
I'm
Three Musketeers.
a little tired this week. I didn't. I'm just keeping up with my calls and my prep for calls. I have gotten no other work done this week, but I think that's still keeping afloat for me. So I'm happy. So, but you're having a good week, right, Aidan? You seemed particularly chipper in the Slack channels.
Yes, we have some pretty major optic updates coming out next week, and today was a testing day, which also meant that I got to play with all the cool new things. So very excited, and there'll be a lot of stuff people can read next week about the new releases.
Nice.
Okay, cool.
Anything big from your week, Mike? Anything notable?
Actually, there is. I mean, I'll get on the bandwagon. So a long running project I've worked on that you two have probably heard me talk about before is this thing called ALPS, which is profiles semantics that you can share on the web. And there's a super creative team in Tokyo, led by Akihito Toriyama, and he has created a great tool called ASD, App State Diagram. So it creates state diagrams and documentation from ALPS documents. So it really makes it human readable. And they just added a new feature where they actually can connect to other documents on the internet. So you can actually chain these things together and start sharing semantics all without hosting it all directly yourself. So I'm just super excited. So they released that this week. They also release support for the old XML format, which has been falling out of favor. I have a lot of XML content. So I spent the week playing around with this new iteration of the state diagramming tool, and it really gets me excited. It's very cool. So that's been a really bright spot for me this week too.
Nice. That's such validation for you. I mean, you've been working on ALPS for so long, and for me, like, I see it. I saw it a while ago. I remember the aha moment I had for it. But then I realized, like, we got a lot of storytelling around why ALPS matters, or why this matters to the wider space. But the tooling is what I always felt is going to have to come in to really drive that home for folks.
Yep.
So this is good to see.
Very cool. There have been several other really creative tools in the space just in the last year. It kind of popped up. There's a tool called Eiger out of a gentleman, Philip Kilardi, in Czechoslovakia. I had released a version, a proof of concept version called Unified, which translates between some formats. There was even somebody that applied this to some AWS computer, developer kits. But anyway, it is really exciting. So it's been a good year, and then this was just a really nice capper for the week.
Did you know this was coming out, or was it a big surprise?
It was a big surprise. The folks in Tokyo are always doing something. They were testing lots of things, and there was talk about it, and we talked about it in the specification group, but they always sort of lead, they lead with code. They say, okay, well, let's see if we can build one. And they built one. And what I realized something was going on because they were filing bugs and specs and asking questions. So there's just been a super creative group. And I know from talking to them, Koriyama, that they actually have other stuff in the works, which again, I don't want to steal their thunder. It's all open source, but they're being super creative. So it was very exciting.
That's magical when people that you don't even know build things on top of the thing that you built, and then you get surprised by it. It's just a crazy moment. Yeah, take that one and hold on to it. That's super special, man. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, it's very fun. I think we've all experienced versions of that in our lives, right? And that for me, like, people talk about writing code, really, like, when the code works, it gets them a big rush. Well, I get the big rush when what you just said happens, Aidan. When people I've never met use something that I've been involved in creating, and it's a positive experience for them. That's a big rush for me.
Well, even though I just kind of glossed over my week and said, "Oh, I'm tired," um, I had a lot of interesting things happen this week, personal and work wise. But I'm going to skip over a lot of it and kind of focus on my conversation this morning because it alludes to, I think, what we were maybe going to talk about in the Slack channel. And so I had a call this morning, an hour-long call, super fascinating, with a gentleman named Luis, who I believe is in Venezuela. I might be wrong. But he's with Oracle Hospitality. And so he runs all of the APIs for Marriott and all. Basically, they're the largest hospitality software provider in the world. And so he's got these APIs, and they're in a GitHub repo. And the magical moment, I mean, I won't go into too much detail about the overall conversation, but the magical moment for me was I imported it. I created a Postman workspace, and I grabbed his repo and I imported all of the Swagger 2.0 specs that were in there. And I said, oh, well, I'll delete this repo. I'm going to make it public so you can see it and play with it while we're talking on the call. And but I'll delete it when the call is done. He's like, oh no, those are in a public repo. You can leave that up. That's fine. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. He's all, and it's really important that these are licensed openly because the licensing of the API specs is really critical to interoperability between systems. I was like, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is. And
so your default was to like expect them to want to be closed and they want it to be open.
No, he I'm kind of no bullshit in my call, so he knows who I am. I follows on Twitter, and I was pretty clear with him when I got into the call, as I am with all of my Oracle conversations. And the conversation, what breached the awkward point where I was honest with him, was he was talking about their hospitality systems. They have, I think he said like 42% or something like that market share. And he's all, that's great, but it's also really bad. And I was like, why is it bad? And he said, well, because there's a lot of, because of the business model it's not always a positive that their system is used in these hotel chains, and they're working to atone for those historical business model sins and how they price things, how they because he talked about how they would license and certify each individual SOAP web service, and you had to go through training and you had to pay for that training and you had to pay for the license, and there was just all these hurdles. And then so they have this whole free layer, and then when you do get your app built, there's a partner tier and you pay per API call. They were really embracing the new API driven business model as part of atoning for these sins. And then when we got to the licensing part, I was like, well, that's a really good first step. I'm actually really honestly impressed that you guys are doing this, and I want to talk about how to showcase this as part of the Open API initiative. And this will be more of you guys atoning for your sins, to which he responded, amen. And he's like more than happy to start down this journey. And so I was actually, it was funny that we were talking about this in Slack, that we might talk about Oracle versus Google copyright. And then I had this call this morning. So yeah, that was my morning.
That actually is super, super fascinating, right? So fascinating in the sense of, because you talk about this a lot, right? You talk about the sort of the socio-political aspects of tech. And what you're telling me is you had a very socio-political and economic conversation, right? And it was really, what you highlighted in the story you're telling really had nothing to do with endpoints. It all had to do with, what it used to cost, how we used to model it, how the model affects things, what we can do to change the model and change effect. That's, to me, is actually super, super encouraging.
And it all feeds the stories we tell about who we are and why all this stuff matters. And it influences the stories that your customers tell. I mean, the people in these hotels, they've been telling stories over the years that are, having market share and market dominance is not everything. That does not mean people are going to be like, Oracle's great because they they're top of the market, you know. It's
Yeah.
like, no, like, so these things matter. These things really impact how we see the world. I got one other Oracle and Google story before. I think we probably should educate some of our guests on what is Oracle versus Google. But I wrote 3 blog posts a couple weeks back, which I know, Mike, you read
Yep.
one on my blog. I wrote one on the Postman blog that was very well received. Well, there was actually a lot of controversial comments, but it was highly trafficked, which is good, right? I guess.
Yep. Yep.
And so I wrote a third one, which I submitted into the Open API Initiative Slack channel and said, hey, here's this little post. And the way the editorial process that I'm instituting is part of the Open API Initiative is drafts get published, and it doesn't mean it's going on the blog. It's open. It's a feedback period, and people can do structural changes, and people can flat out say no. I expected just a flat out no. You know, I did not expect this story to make it to the blog, and it won't. But I didn't get a flat out no. I'd leave it. I post the link, and then I make people request for access, and then they edit and they make changes and leave their feedback. And the first request for access was Oracle. And then the second request for access was Google. I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. So anyway,
yeah,
that was fun. But no, it's not going to get posted. But it did start a very lively conversation, which I think we're going to continue at the API Specifications Conference on stage. So it should be good.
Very cool. That's very good. Very good.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey. Is this what you guys want to talk about, or do we have anything else on the table?
I'd love to explore this. I don't know, Aidan, about you, what you've got going.
I think this is going to be a conversation that starts with APIs and the Oracle versus Google, and gets to a lot of other places just because of who we are.
Just because the 3 of us, right?
So let me do the quick for people who are watching that maybe not know, just the couple minute version of introduction of what this is, and then
it's a movie from the 2010s, right? Like a Steven Spielberg movie.
It is. Yeah. It's like it's going to be multi-part. It's going to it's going to be a franchise, end up being a franchise. But because there's another part about the actual ruling that I find is fascinating in a storytelling sense. So I'm hoping this will bring it home to telling stories. But so 2010, Oracle bought Sun Microsystems, which happened to own Java, which is the dominant enterprise programming language. And then 5 months later, after the deal closed, they opened a lawsuit suing Google for copyright infringement on the Java programming API. And so when Google created Android, the mobile operating system, in 2008, I believe, 2009, they had approached Sun for licensing. Those talks fell through. Google copied 11,000 lines of the interface for Java, because when people program in Android, they wanted it to be familiar. They wanted Java developers to be able to go from writing in Java to writing and building Android apps and it being familiar. So they used the structure, the naming and the ordering of the Java API, which, okay, seems fair enough. But it went to the court case, and I sometimes I get these details switched around, so I have to talk slow. So went to the court case, and then the jury found that indeed Google did violate Oracle's copyright, but it was fair use. And then the judge, because this was a jury who decided this, the Judge Alsop, who actually learned Java to make this ruling. He actually bought the book and learned Java as part, which is, I have to say, is pretty cool. And then he said, actually, APIs are not copyrightable in the first place. Thus, fair use does not apply, because they're APIs, because the API, it's an interface. It's meant to be reusable, and it's just meant it's not copyrightable. It's like a menu. It's like a restaurant menu, and it's like facts. And then, of course, Oracle appealed, went to appeals court, which then overturned and said, no, actually, APIs are copyrightable, and they're in violation of fair use. And then, of course, Google ratcheted it up to the next level. It went to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court kind of delayed because of COVID, but then they finally ruled last month and said, we're actually not going to rule on whether APIs are copyrightable. We're going to defer to the lower court. So by doing that, APIs are copyrightable because that's the precedent. And then they said what we're going to rule on is the fair use. And they ultimately said that Google's implementation was fair use. And the reasons why is because they copied the interface. In an API, you don't have access to the back-end code. They only copied the part that is intended to be shared. And the part that brings, now getting back to the storytelling, bringing it home, is one of the sections of the ruling that said is, defining copyright in programming languages is harder than in physical forms of writing and creative expressions, because you can't copyright an idea. You can only copyright an expression of that idea, and a digital expression of that idea is much harder to assert and defend than it is in a physical writing of a book, an artwork, a creative expression. And they said also, when it comes to fantasy and creative works, the fair use is, okay, so how do I say this? So fair use is more defensible in creative and fantasy, and thus in digital, the fair use is wider and more defensible and harder to sue against. So thus, because it was the interface, they didn't have access to the back-end code. Because of this wide swath of what is fair use and creative reuse of expressions, that it was okay and they can do this. So I really find one, digital storytelling in a programmatic way that is a wide fair use, and then also because of fantasy, which I see APIs as being nothing but dragons and wizards, and and so like I love that fair. I mean, I don't think it should be copyrightable in the first place, but if it is, I love that I have a wide swath to argue and defend on. So how'd I do? That was that was still like 10 minutes. It was longer than I expected.
It was great. I'm curious about the human side of it though. Like when this was going on, what did it mean to you when this was sort of outstanding and we didn't know what way it was going to fall?
I mean, early on, okay, so what I didn't put in there is I worked with the EFF throughout that journey at all three places and signed the amicus brief as a computer scientist, which I am not. And say all the way up to the Supreme Court saying I'm against copyright and I'm pro fair use if copyright applies. And so I spent a lot of time studying this and thinking about it. I've spent hundreds of hours pondering this, writing up examples of fair use from the cloud and reusing Amazon's S3 API. I've written several times on restaurant menus and how APIs are like restaurant menus. Your secret sauce is not the naming and ordering of burgers on your menu. It's the meat you use. It's your service. It's, and so I took it. I did this all through 2012 through 2016, the bulk of the work. And that was a period of time where I took my job really seriously, and I cared about things way too much more than I probably should have. And then I also drank a lot back then. So I was wrapped up in this. Like now I'm like, I don't drink as much as I used to, and I don't take myself as seriously as I used to. So now I'm like, it's much easier for me. But back then I was like, it was serious, and the world's coming down, and this is gonna be, the equivalent of using glue in the gears of the industrial age rather than grease. You know, this is just going to kill innovation. And, you know, I was very hyperbolic. Now I'm not so much. So
why do you think that is? Like what's changed? I mean, this has gone on for years. What's changed in that interim from your point of view? Is it mostly you've changed, or is it mostly circumstances, you think, or is it just the result of, you know, of the decision? What's kind of changed your attitude, you think?
I think it's all the above. I mean, it settled in that, okay, APIs are copyrightable. So what? Apply copyright to your API. Okay. I think the theater of the court case as it's played out, and with drama queens like me freaking out about it for so many years and writing stories and getting everyone all worked up about it, like no one's going to try that again, or if they do, they're not very wise. And so I don't like, okay, API, and I've seen, and I think the space has just grown. We have so many APIs, like the concept of managing licensing for all of those APIs. It's just going to be one of those things in the long list of things that doesn't get done, right there with like security for your APIs and all those things that we've seen that nobody does because they don't have the time. And so I think just reality has ground on that. It's like, you know, oh, it doesn't matter because we're going to have so many goddamn APIs and they're all going to be special snowflakes. And then some people are realizing that, oh, actually, we need reuse in our interoperability. We should probably start using the same APIs, FHIR for healthcare, PSD2. And so there's a lot of movement. So collectively, all of it. And then, yeah, there's the end point of I've changed and I just don't take technology so seriously. I realize that this is all about people and this is all about business and politics. And so it's not going to gum up the works as much. The licensing and copyright's not going to gum up the technical works as much as I thought it would be in the beginning. So
it's really interesting to hear you talk about FHIR again, because I think our last Just the Three of Us episode, we were talking about standards and the importance of having these shared standards. And like you could almost imagine, as some countries are around the world now, creating like, you know, governmental copyleft for our API, saying you must implement this thing now. It almost is like, not only did we avoid the copyright issue, we've now sort of swung the other direction too, and that's pretty fascinating. And there's definitely places where you want everyone to use the same API, and that's like, it's starting to become kind of like the opposite issue. And now it's like, well, how do we make sure we are using this shared understanding the right way?
Yeah, and to give actually full credit to Luis on the call, I actually don't want to call him out in a negative way. Like, the guy is like the most honest, real vision of how to get beyond this and move forward, you know, in a large enterprise organization. And so I have to give it to him for taking on this fight. And he knows what he's up against. And so I want to support the guy. But I think it really shows the power of storytelling for me in this is like, Oracle is going to change, not because I think they truly believe in licensing and how it reduces friction and interoperability. I think they're getting that, but it's because APIs opened up new business models for them and they're seeing more revenue opportunities in these ways. But also the stories that have been told, it hurt their reputation, you know, and they're really, and I've had other conversations with Oracle groups over the last month or so, and they're genuinely trying to turn over a new leaf and tell new stories. Now, as I said to them, they're going to have to, you know, prove this. They've got a lot to atone for their sins, but they really get the damage that the storytelling has done, and they want to tell new stories, and they want to try. So really, for me, that's been the biggest thing that changed this. And, you know, from the little stories I told, like I watched at the appeals court, Google's lawyer arguing the restaurant menu analogy, which I had written 2 years before and I think I wrote 2 or 3 posts on about how, you know, they're just restaurant menus. And so all the way to every wave that hit, ruling, all the tech blogs lit up with stories, all the legal blogs, and it started going outside of the tech, especially at the Supreme Court level. The storytelling was widespread, and so that elevates APIs in general, and it just really shows the power of storytelling that transcends even the technology, the business, and the politics of all of this, in my mind. So,
yeah, the storytelling part of it, and also for me, this is a repeat. This is a rerun, right? So I remember from the protocol level activities, before HTTP was really the dominant protocol. That one of the protocols that was competing and actually gaining a lot of traction was the Gopher protocol out of University of Minnesota. And University of Minnesota, at some point early in this process, announced that they were considering some kind of copywriting and licensing. And they were doing this because they said they wanted to protect that people wouldn't just do one-offs and mess it up and confuse the market. Well, there was a huge firestorm at that point, and everybody was like, "Oh, stop using Gopher."
Yeah.
So they got, they really got, rolled over. And one of the things that was also happening at the same time, so that was in the 90s. But the IETF had always gone through these great lengths to make everyone sign off on intellectual property freedoms for all of the work that they did, because they sort of saw ahead of time what was possible. So this has happened before, and I think now we're getting it with APIs. The idea of can you copyright them? Is it in the best interest to copyright them? I suspect we might see some people do the same thing they did with Gopher, which is, Amundsen copyrighted all these APIs. None of us are going to use that API.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we have that coming. And then I have to be honest, what we're talking about is protocols at the very generic level, right? We've been through that. That was 90s. Here we are, 20 years later, 30 years later, we're talking about APIs at the generic level, at the general level, interfaces at the general level. And as we get to more reuse in the next 10 to 15 years, it's going to be like Aidan, I think what you're talking about, which is how can we make sure everybody's using Fire? Well, Fire is going to have to be protected from anybody owning and copyrighting, or any other APIs that want to have wide use. And I think there's going to be this copyleft, or this sort of, open sourcey approach to not just the code, this was still really about code, right? This was really made up as trying to be about code. It's going to be interface level upon level upon level. Then we're going to constantly be facing its best if it's a collective and not, a rent-seeking kind of opportunity. So I'm semi-encouraged. I was a bit miffed because I wanted this to come out to just be that they're not copyrightable, but I understand where this is right now.
Yeah, we got, it's not over. I mean, the Oracle v. Google part of the journey is over, but it'll definitely continue. I don't think the copyright's going to stand. I think there'll be other challenges that move us further left on that. But what I see, and so from the ruling, and I posted on my last post, is I pulled all these citations from cases I had never heard from the Supreme Court. They did their homework as the Supreme Court should. So I have this long list of citations that I'm working my way through to understand and realize, oh, this is not new. This is wave 30 in a 40, 50 year journey of layers of code. And for me, the realization moment as the universe continues to expand every kind of generation with compute is some of us see the separation, and some of us, usually who are clinging to older business models, don't always acknowledge or see the expansion because we're too attached to the world that is. And I had a conversation on a podcast or webinar a couple weeks ago, and people don't see what is an API? And this is one of the things, from the licensing perspective, is I go to a lot of people, how would you license your API? Well, Apache 2.0 or MIT. I'm like, well, that's the code. And they're like, API is code. I'm like, mm-hmm. And when I think the second wave of the Oracle v. Google, there was a big, oh no, APIs aren't copyrightable because they're processes. They're patentable. And what would happen if people patented an API? Then the world would collapse. And there was a post on Programmable Web, and I did a research using the USPTO API, and I pulled APIs, patents that mention APIs using the USPTO API, and everything is patented. Like there are so many API patents, like hypermedia is patented.
Yeah.
Like all these things that you're like, I'm like, the world's already collapsed, y'all. We're done. Let's go home. And so, but I came in and I patented the process of patenting APIs. And so like I saved the world. We're all clear on that. No, I mean, and so like, and then I also did, what did I do? I did something. Oh, I did every word in the dictionary. I auto-generated an open API. You can find this on API Evangelist. I auto-generated a REST endpoint and a little JSON schema, a Swagger for every word in the dictionary, and I put it into the public commons, with Creative Commons. So every word API is already copyrighted and in the public domain, thanks to me.
Oh, that's definitely a Black Mirror episode where you want to destroy copyright, so you generate anything that could possibly exist.
Yeah,
and then you die before you finish open sourcing it, so your heirs inherit the universe. Like there's an episode there.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
So I'm like, at this point in 2021, I love the journey. I'm having way too much fun. I'm taking myself a lot less serious in it all. But that point of what is an API, because the conversation a couple of weeks ago was, someone said, well, the whole thing, the whole back end and the front end is the API. And I'm like, is it? Because if the Amazon S3 API, there's many implementations of the Amazon S3 API out there. Min.io, min.io is a multi-cloud storage solution that their API is just the S3 API. They're just use the same interface. It's our API. And I'm like, so did they implement the backend? Did they input, or is the backend of the Min.io API the same backend as Amazon S3 API? Well, I guess it is, because all they're doing is now routing it to the S3 API. So it's like, but Amazon isn't cracking down on the copyright. So they're they see the benefit of the reuse of the S3 API. And so for me, the API is just the naming and the ordering and the, of the API interface, just the interface. It's not the backend. The backend, because with gateways, and kind of in the Supreme Court ruling, they said, well, because they were using the Java API routes, what routes you to the code, they weren't copying the code, they were copying the routes to the code. And once you bring that onto the web with DNS, and once you further break up the backend from the interface with gateways, because if I'm just using a gateway for my API and it's to my CRM or my ERP or my database, it's a SQL. Now, what's the API in that? Is my ERP an API? So I love just thinking about these things. I think
you can reductio ad absurdum that example to, like, I'm watching a Disney movie and I hold a filter in front of it. Is it still a Disney movie? And like, can I show that royalty free with the blue filter versus not the blue filter? And yeah, like, I think of APIs as jobs to be done. So like, I am doing a thing for you, and you can also reducto ad absurdum that down to, like, can you copyright? If you give me 10 cents, I'll give you lemonade. Like, can you copyright that fundamental transaction, or patent that fundamental transaction behind the lemonade stand? And I don't think that you can, and I don't think that you should be able to. And anything that you're doing that renders value to another person, if there's an action that like renders value, I don't think you should be able to copyright the mechanics of that interaction. You should only be able to copyright the back end. So like your menu example too, like any job to be done cannot be or should not be copyrightable in my mind.
You know, this may be going a little bit too far afield, but I think one of the challenges we're all struggling with is we've developed so many rules about how the physical world works, right? How we physically interact, how I store something, I own something, I protect something, I put something in a box, I have it, routed and so on and so forth. And in the virtual world, some of those rules just don't apply, right? So I think that's why copyright, and by the way, I misspoke. Gopher was going to charge licensing fees. They weren't really going to copyright, but it sort of had this similar effect. Wanted to correct myself. There'll be people on here who know that.
There's still licensing involved.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that we're also struggling with on the virtual side is the lack of physicality, the lack of like tangible nature, even to the point of economics, right? So sharing data, value of data. Data is non-rival, right? I can share the same thing of data with lots and lots of people. It's not consumed when I share it with Aidan. I can still share the same data with Kin, right? So I think copyrights and even patents and some other things are going to be challenged. I think they may not apply in the same way, and we have to kind of rethink them. I think that goes to what you're saying, Aidan, in terms of if it's an action, if it's a commitment, if it's a speech act, right, or whatever, that may be something totally different than the actual bits that power that thing. So I think we're just opening just a bit of Pandora's box on this deal. I think there's going to be a lot coming ahead.
These are really for me. I've been unpacking it for the last 2 years heavily in a cybernetic sense. So grabbing Wiener, I don't know how Norbert's name, his beliefs around cybernetics being our relationship with technology.
Yeah.
And for me, the API is like this DMZ zone for our relationship with technology. And for me, it's widening. Like, I mean, I'm that kid in the Sixth Sense. All I see are APIs, like all around us. I just see APIs, and so but I know not everyone else sees APIs. I'm like, there's APIs under that car. There's APIs behind that sign. There's
sometimes the APIs don't even know they're APIs.
Yeah, it's scary. Exactly.
That was deep. That's good. That's good.
Whoa.
For the movie fans.
That was gonna mess me up all weekend, dude. But this is what we're in the business of, right? Aidan is messing each other up all weekends.
That's what he does. Exactly right.
But yeah, that messed me up. All right, because I'm like, wait, do I know? I'm like, oh wait, am I
an API?
Oh man, it's like because I struggle with the am I a robot like throughout the week. So anyway. But for me, the API is totally this widening DMZ zone of this tussle between what is human and what is, it's like my like on a Facebook, like that's an API call. But
yeah,
at what point does it stop being human and am I reduced to a transaction in a Facebook sense? And the API is the conduit for that. And then at what point is, those aggregate throughout the day? I become a transaction in a demographic sense, and so, same with our phones, our televisions. And like, for me, the APIs are very much a two-way street until they're not, it's like I see Google Maps being this at a community level. It's like Google Maps was very much a two-way street. Like, map your neighborhood. Hey, we're mapping it for you. Hey, add all this metadata to your neighborhood via the API. Hey, embed this thing on your community website, and we'll provide you all this map value through this map API. But hey, at some point we're gonna start turning the machine, and it's the vacuum, the pneumatic tubes are gonna start pulling data, and now we're extracting and mining value from your communities. So APIs are very much this two-way street until they're not, and there's a value exchange there until whoever's on the server side is sucking that from you. And so I think I'm always trying to struggle with our relationship with, I left Postman proxy on a couple weeks ago for accidentally, and it was just taking API calls from my Chrome and dumping them in and building collections. And it did 21,000 API calls in a 24-hour period, and it's like, so my cybernetic tussle with the digital realm, but this is very physical. This is in my house, right? This laptop's here and the collection's here. Like, what's that boundary between my house and all of these, 20,000 API calls across, I guess, 1,000 domains or corporations? So anyways, that was a little far.
Let me just jump in real quick. I know, Aidan, you want to say something. So here's the thing, to go back to sort of what I was talking about, physics and virtuals, right? To me, APIs are the connectors to the data, right? So data, it turns out, often we want to protect data. We want to only share it with certain people and so on and so forth. But the APIs are separate from that data, right? So APIs are valuable when lots of people are using them. Network effects. APIs are really a great world for network effects. But the data itself, it may actually be very valuable when only a few people are using the data, right? You create
supply
this sort
and
of
demand.
Exactly right. You create this De Beers moment, like this is really rare, and people are trying to do that with NFTs, right? They're trying to create rarity, scarcity for profit. So I think one of the tussles, you mentioned tussle, I think one of the tussles we have is the APIs are the connectors for passing data. The data may be valued very differently than the connector is valued, right? So I think that's one of the reasons that I've really been fascinated about this case, and that is, are we ready to talk about the difference between the space between data, which is the API, and the data? And I think we're not always able to do that. It's tough. It's really, really tough. Yeah. That's almost philosophical in its approach. I understand.
It makes sense. It was right along lines with the way I was thinking.
Yep.
Yeah, I see so much truth in what you're saying, Mike, about how the metaphors are maybe not the ones that will serve us best.
Yeah.
And this is a very common human experience. You take something that is known, some set of ways to get on in the world, you go into an entirely new environment, and then you try to use that past knowledge to help you inform what to do in the future. Like when we first created multi-user computers, we had ownership, and there are ownership was encoded, and then we added those actions of read and write and all of these things. And that may have been a cardinal thing, because ownership isn't necessarily the same in this environment as is here. Yeah. It's almost skeuomorphic that we brought that with us. Yeah. That our files have owners and all of these things.
Files and folders themselves, right? Files and folders themselves are super skeuomorphic, because it isn't just one file. It's all virtual. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you.
Yeah. So so we have these stories that kind of made sense about what can be owned. And then we see it kind of not serve us, and we're in these tussles because we're using the wrong metaphors. So the whole thing about who is responsible for moderation on social platforms. It seems obvious that everywhere in the world that I have ever, not I, but a person has ever said something like yelling fire in a movie theater, that person is liable for that. Why would it ever be the movie theater, and why would it ever be the chair? And why would it ever be the person sitting next to them that also yells fire? Although maybe it should be. But on the internet, that's not, the person isn't even in the conversation. It's not, is it the platform or is it the moderator? And it's never the person who said the thing should be held accountable for the thing that they said. And it's weird, just because of the form and the nature of it is because you're on the internet and everything has to be amplified. It's you're in a room full of people whispering, and the only way they could hear you yell fire is if someone with a megaphone heard you, because they've got their extra earpiece on and they yell it too. So all of these things are just, the metaphors are just wrong. And we're having conversations in the wrong part. And I think a lot of the judges, I also was reading Justice Breyer's thing, and he was talking computer. He said the copied lines value came from the developers being invested in the ecosystem rather than the actual operation of the program. And he like said Google used the API to let Java programmers build Android apps, which was a fundamentally transformative use. Like he thought about the difference between an interface and implementation. He didn't use those words, but like that is the root of it. So I think that's like how progress happens when we all start accepting like different stories together. And that's basically what these judges did over the last decade is learn the new story, but in their own framing.
Yep, that's good.
As the future evolves, I mean, I think it's hard for us. Like you have to educate yourself to kind of move forward with some of these concepts. And it's like Gopher back in the moment, like no one saw what the internet was going to be in that moment. You know, you like, of course you're going to think to license and you may want to protect that and have the best interest, but you're actually stifling, you know, in that because you're believing that story in the moment. It's interesting.
Because that metaphor that University of Minnesota was working on, which is we're going to need to support this. We're going to need money to keep this supported. That was really the wrong metaphor. They didn't need to support it. It could create its own support. We were about to explode into this completely different model for software, and they couldn't quite see it yet, and they got caught in the wheels. Right? They like whoop. They blew it. They were glue for the moment. But, you know, that's what open source, you know, in its various forms, right? Free software, you know, open source, all these things have very different versions. And I know we have to be doing the same thing right now to really get back to what Aidan's saying too. Like I've got to be, I'm sure I'm operating on the wrong metaphors and I'm struggling to sort those out. And I just hope, like, you know, so many of us, that I pay attention, that when the metaphor is broken, that I'm wise enough to stop and look around and say, oh yeah, that's a better thing. And you know, ready for that. But who knows, right?
How do we find the right metaphors? I mean, what kind of exercises do we need to put in place so we properly, because I've asked people, everybody that I trust in the space, what's a good metaphor for an API? You know, just because isn't a metaphor essential for the network effect that you talk about? Like we have to have a shared understanding and common knowledge. So we need this thing to anchor it in so we can all get on board with this abstract. But I ask all y'all in the API space that I trust that know, you know, get APIs at the level that I do. And we all disagree on what the metaphor is. So I'm curious.
We all do. I don't know. Aidan, what do you think? You've talked about this stuff before.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just is about people doing things for each other. Like it is an economy. And that's how I've always seen it. It's us rendering services to one another, jobs that need doing. And when you have a shared API, it's almost like going to the same shelf in the grocery store where like, you know that you were in the domain of pasta and you have choices and, you know, you can do similar things on every piece of pasta that you buy, no matter what box it came in. But some pasta is better than others, and some pasta is better for you than it is for other people. And some pasta costs a lot more up on this shelf than it does at the bottom shelf. And that's just the way it is. But these are all services we do to each other and do for each other and around each other. And I think, you know, you were talking about when the click of the like sort of stops being you and starts being machine. Well, that like becomes a notification that gets sent through a cell tower to someone's phone who opens it and feels a genuine human emotion because Kin cares about them. And then like they go do something nice in the world and smile at the grocery store clerk when they may not have otherwise. And then there's another human thing that happened. And like, these are just, at the end of the day, as long as there are people on this planet, we are all just the human side of this. And that's why like I will die. I've said it in like many, many forms. I will die on the hill of APIs being a human problem because they absolutely are. And we should think of them that way.
Man, that's good. That's good stuff. That is hard to, you know, I think I had something really smart I wanted to say, and now it's like, well, screw that. It's because I really like what you're saying. I mean, I really like what you're saying in the sense that what we're saying is then these are all enablers. These are enablers for human interaction. These are enablers that are undeniable. I mean, your like or not like, it affects people. right? And
Yeah.
this is just a medium for making that connection. The one thing I'll say is, in the metaphor story, for a while I used to carry sort of APIs and services and the web and the internet. I used to carry the brain metaphor around. It's like a giant brain, right? And they're all connected, and the message goes from synapses. And I abandoned that metaphor a long time ago, about 10 years ago. I abandoned that metaphor. And the metaphor that I am more comfortable with now today, and describing what IT world we built, is more like a community, like an ant colony. Like there are all these independent actors, or like a school of fish, or like a school of birds. There's all these independent actors that have their own motivations, have their own sort of internal engines, but collectively can move in similar ways and become super, super powerful, and in some ways sort of give the appearance of being a single organism when it's really lots of little ones. And I think that to me, that's why I'm big on connections, right? Because I think really what we're enabling, what I work on is the connections. I don't actually work so much on the endpoints as I work on the connector. All of my work has been on how things connect. I don't care what's on the other end, honestly. I really, whether you call yourself a client or a server or whatever code it was, it's the connections. I've always been invested in that. So I think that,
what troubles me though, like I agree, like I've been in this to connect, to interact. And that's what I get up on the stage and I evangelize. That's like 2010 to now. Just I get up on the mountain, and that's what this is about. And then you start saying other similarly weird things like it's democratizing, but then the line between connect and interact and transact is too slippery for me. Like you and I are interacting and connecting, but the people right above are transacting. And a lot of the people don't realize that everything, and that's what Audrey always says, my wife always says, you reduce everything to a transaction. That's what you do. But I'm doing it with the intent of connecting and interacting. And then this undertow comes in from me, or this over thing comes in, and I realize, I just set up transactions and turned all of this goodness into transactions for someone who made a bunch of money, and I had nothing to do. I was the face of it. And I'm like, that's what keeps killing me. So
I don't know. I kind of would question that story, because there's more than just that end. There's more than just the person somewhere on top who made money on it. Like when I buy something on DoorDash, there's the small business that got money. There's a cook who was paid. There's this person who curried the food to me, who has a living as well. And like I smiled at that person and asked them how their day was, and maybe that helped them. And maybe they did the same thing at the place they picked up the food. And like I would just say that there is someone at the end of both sides of the chain, but there's also like a lot of side effects too from things happening in the world. And I think those are harder to quantify, but like they matter.
I agree. I get swept up and emotionally caught up in those side effects and owning those like somehow they were my fault. And that's me. That's me personally. And I shouldn't always do that. And there's a lot of good that gets enabled, but that's the little eddy on all of this that I get swept up in regularly. And I find myself, walking away from APIs going, maybe I shouldn't do this. So
yeah, there's lots of layers, right? There's constant layers upon layers upon layers. It's an old Zen joke that I remember, which is the Zen master's got the student, and the Zen master's acting really weird, and he's doing all sorts of things like just ahead of somebody else. And finally the student says, "You've been here before." And the Zen master slaps him and says, "How many times?" We keep doing this over and over and over. The light bulb goes off. How many times, right? So I think that's the thing I think I'm getting from you, Aidan, more than anything else, which is all of these connections. There's so many levels and so many connections in the smallest thing, and that's encouraging. I appreciate that.
I think that's probably a pretty good note to end this on. That was a good one, you guys. That was fun.
Yeah, that's fun for us anyway.
This has been lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
hopefully
We've got
someone
a
else.
guest next week that we're looking forward to having. So people have to tune in for that.
Cool. Very good. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna spin this weekend on whether I'm real or not, or whether I see whether the API. Oh man, I'm gonna be all right. I'm not even gonna start.
I'm gonna spend this weekend figuring out how I can click a like to make you smile. I gotta figure out how to make those connections. This is my mission.
Alrighty, guys. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you go first, Mike. Have a good weekend,
All right.
sir.
See you, gentlemen.
See you, Mike.
Bye bye.
Alrighty, Aidan. Thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure.
See you, Ken. Have a great weekend. Don't think too hard about that. Go for a walk.
I'm gonna definitely get offline and go for a walk this weekend. I need it. Thank you. See you
Cool.
later.
Happy weekend. Bye.
All right. Lots of fun. Another good one. All right. We'll see you guys next week. Have a good weekend.